Okay, now let's bring us all up to date. I have, first off, I have Mike McCauley here. Hope I pronounced that right.
Michioli.
Oops. Say it again.
Michioli.
Michioli, okay. Is that Italian?
Yeah, it's Italian.
Yeah, my stepdad was Italian. Maranzani. If you had an O, I'd be scared, you know. Okay. What I'd like to do now is very quickly bring people up to date. Last night I highlighted a whole bunch of things. But fortunately I don't have to go through the entire document. So let's start here, because the average attention span of an American is like a fruit fly. So a lot of times we forget just what we're doing and why we're doing it. So what I'd like to do is bring us all up to date. Julian Paul Assange, born 3 July 1971, Australian editor, publisher, and activist who founded WikiLeaks in 2006. I lost my scent. There goes my fruit fly. Came to international attention in 2010 when it published a series of leaks provided by Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning. These leaks included the Baghdad airstrike, collateral murder, video, Afghan war logs, the Iraq war logs, and Cablegate. After the 2010 leaks, the United States government launched a criminal investigation into WikiLeaks. November 2010, Sweden issued an international arrest warrant for Assange over allegations of sexual misconduct. He was granted asylum by Ecuador in August of 2012 on the grounds of political persecution, with a presumption that if he were extradited to Sweden, he would be eventually extradited to the United States. Swedish prosecutors dropped their investigation in 2019, saying their evidence had weakened considerably due to the long period of time that has elapsed since the events in question. On April 11th, 2019, Assange's asylum was withdrawn following a series of disputes with Ecuadorian authorities. The police were invited into the embassy and he was arrested. The United States government unsealed an indictment against Assange related to the leaks provided by Manning. On May 23rd, 2019, the United States government further charged Assange with violating the Espionage Act of 1917. Boy. Editors from newspapers, including the Washington Post, New York Times, as well as press freedom organizations, criticized the government's decision to charge Assange under the Espionage Act, characterizing it as an attack on the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guarantees freedom of the press. On 4 January 2021, UK District Judge Vanessa Barrister ruled against the United States' request to extradite Assange and stated that doing so would be oppressive, given concerns over Assange's mental health and risk of suicide. On 10 December 21, High Court in London ruled that Assange could be extradited to the United States to face charges. March of 22, the United Kingdom Supreme Court refused Assange permission to appeal. Assange has been confined in Belmarsh Maximum Security Prison in London since April 2019. After examining Assange, on 9 May 2019, Nils Meltzer, The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, and Degrading Treatment of Punishment concluded that in addition to physical ailments, Mr. Assange showed all symptoms typical for prolonged exposure to psychological torture, including extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and intense psychological trauma. In a later interview, Meltzer criticized the secretive grand jury indictment in the United States, the abusive manner in which the Swedish prosecutors disseminated, recycled, and perpetrated their preliminary investigation into alleged sexual offenses. Determination by Ecuador of Mr. Assange's asylum status and citizenship without any form of due process, and the overt bias against Mr. Assange being shown by British judges since his arrest. He said the United States, United Kingdom, Sweden, and Ecuador were trying to make an example of Assange. He also accused journalists of spreading abusive and deliberately distorted narratives. Shortly after Meltzer's visit, Assange was transferred to the prison's health care unit. 13 September 2019, District Judge Vanessa Barrister ruled that Assange would not be released on 22 September when his prison term ended because he was a flight risk and his lawyer had not applied for bail. She said that his sentence came to an end, his status would change from serving prisoner to a person facing extradition. 1 November 2019, Meltzer said that Assange's health had continued to deteriorate and his life was now at risk. He said the UK government had not acted on the issue. 30 December 2019, Meltzer accused the United Kingdom government of torturing Assange. He said continued exposure to severe mental and emotional suffering clearly amounts to psychological torture or other cruel and inhuman or degrading treatment of punishment. 17 February 2020, the medical journal The Lancet published an open letter from Doctors for Assange, in which they said Assange was in a dire state of health due to the effects of prolonged psychological torture in both the Ecuadorian embassy and Belmarsh prison, which could lead to death, and that his politically motivated medical neglect sets a dangerous precedent. On the same day, Reporters Without Borders posted a separate petition which accused the Trump administration of acting in retaliation for Assange's facilitating major revelations in the international media about the way the United States conducted its wars. The petition said Assange's publications were clearly in the public interest and not espionage. Australian MPs Andrew Wilkie and George Christensen visited Assange and pressed the UK and Australian governments to intervene to stop his being extradited. 21 October 2019. I know this jumps around a little bit, but Assange appeared at the court in the UK for a case management hearing. When Judge Barrister asked about his understanding of the proceedings, Assange replied, "I don't understand how this is equitable. This superpower had 10 years to prepare for this case, and I can't access my writings. It's very difficult where I am to do anything, but these people have unlimited resources. They are saying journalists and whistleblowers are enemies of the people. They have unfair advantages dealing with documents. They know the interior of my life. with my psychologist. They steal my children's DNA. This is not equitable, what is happening here. A couple more minutes here. February 2020. Assange's lawyers contended that he had been charged with political offenses and therefore could not be extradited. In March, the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute condemned the mistreatment of Assange in the extradition trial. Assange appeared in court on 7 December 2020, facing new indictments with 18 counts. Conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defense information, conspiracy to commit computer intrusions, obtaining national defense information, 7 counts, and disclosure of national defense information, 9 counts. Just by my quick look here, that's 19 counts, actually. Some witnesses who testified in September, such as Daniel Ellsberg, did so remotely through a video link due to COVID-19. Technical problems caused extensive delays. Amnesty International, PEN Norway, 8 members of the European Parliament had their access to the live stream revoked. Barrister responded that the initial invitations have been sent in error. Other witnesses testified that the conditions of imprisonment, which would be likely to worsen upon extradition to the U.S., placed Assange at a high risk of depression and suicide, which was exacerbated by his Asperger's syndrome. Patrick Eller, a former forensic examiner for the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command, they're nobody to play with, testified that Assange did not crack and could not have cracked the password mentioned in the U.S. indictment, as Chelsea Manning had intentionally sent only a portion of the password's hash. Moreover, Eller stated that the password cracking was a common topic of discussion among other soldiers. Testimony on 30 September revealed new allegations surrounding the surveillance of the Ecuadorian embassy by UC Global. A former UC Global employee who spoke anonymously, fearing reprisals, stated that the firm undertook an increasingly sophisticated operation after it was put into contact with the Trump administration by Sheldon Adelson. According to the employee, intelligence agents discussed plans to break into the embassy to kidnap or poison Assange and attempted to obtain DNA of a baby who was believed to be Assange's child. 4 January 2021, Judge Barrister ruled that Assange could not be extradited to the United States, citing concerns of his mental health and risk of suicide in a U.S. prison. She sided with the U.S. on every other point, including whether the charges constituted political offenses and whether he was entitled to freedom of speech protections. June 2021. Icelandic newspaper Stundin published details of the interview with Sigur Ingi Thordarson. Well, I got it wrong. The witness identified as, quote-unquote, teenager in the U.S. Department's case against Assange. In the interview, Thordarson, who had received a promise of immunity from prosecution in return for cooperating with the FBI, stated he had fabricated allegations used by the U.S. indictment. August 2021, High Court Lord Justice Holyrood decided that Judge Bannister may have given too much weight to what Holyrood called a misleading report by an expert witness for the defense, psychiatrist Professor Michael Koppelman, and granted permission for the contested risk of suicide to be raised on appeal. 10 December 2021, the High Court ruled in favor of the United States. The Lord Chief Justice and Lord Justice Holyrood ruled that, in line with previous judgments, when the U.S. administration gives a promise of fair and humane treatment, its word should not be doubted. Ugh. On April 2022, Chief Magistrate Paul Goldspring of the Westminster Magistrates Court formally approved the extradition of Assange to the U.S. and referred the decision to Home Secretary Priti Patel. If Patel approves the court order, Assange can appeal the decision by judicial review. Okay, now we're all caught up, and Mike's over here chomping at the bit, and he represents Assange Boston.
I'm working with some members in Assange Defense Boston. I'm a student at Harvard University.
Okay, excellent. Well, we got somebody with some brains. Okay, cool. Hope you can read better than I can. So, please, give me your assessment of the situation.
So I'll start with some, introductory comments about the event we have coming up. Next Sunday, May 29th, from 8 to 10:30 a.m. is Harvard's commencement for the classes of 2020 and 2021, which have been delayed from COVID. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland is the speaker. Garland is currently leading the extradition case against Julian Assange, which is the most serious threat to press freedom in the modern history of our country. Harvard is arguably the most influential university in the world, yet it picks people like Garland to speak at its biggest event. Moreover, it produces people like Merrick Garland. For example, he's an alum of Harvard class of 74 and Harvard Law class of 77. Other alums and professors of the university include the likes of Henry Kissinger, Alan Dershowitz, Larry Summers, and so on. Harvard uses its influence in order to cultivate the next generations of the ruling class and to preserve the interests of the powerful. That's what this trial is about. So while Harvard is allowing someone who's persecuting a political prisoner to lecture its graduating students about their futures, I thought it would be good to try and raise some awareness about Assange and the extradition. So along with other concerned students and local Assange activists, we will be handing out information on the case to guests at the event and trying to get Garland's attention.
Well, do you think you'll be able to get his attention? I mean, I hope so. I really do. Don't get me wrong. But I was there when Kissinger spoke, and I didn't get his attention.
Yeah, I hope so too. We'll probably be outside of the gates wherever they're letting people in so we can hand out info to the guests. But then if we also have some graduating students who are on the inside who could potentially hold up some signs while Garland is speaking to get his attention, that would also be ideal.
Excellent, because everything I've seen, don't get me wrong, I have a great deal of respect for Merrick Garland. I think he's essentially an honest man, but I think he's a very slow man as far as getting things done. It might be a case of dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, crossing one T, which ends in rump, he should have been indicted a long time ago. But I'm not a lawyer, and I'm certainly not head of the DOJ. So I know that you've been active in this. Have people been paying attention?
I find that even in certain left circles and activist circles, Julian Assange's case doesn't come up as much as other issues and as much as we'd like it to. I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the media hasn't covered the trial very much in the United States. When it does, the coverage is not very good. Corporate journalists tend to even cheer on the extradition because they don't view Assange as one of them. They view him as kind of an outsider. And so we see that a lot of progressive-minded students who I guess would potentially be interested in the cause just aren't up to speed on it.
Yeah, and that's why I went through the whole thing, well, I highlighted part of it to bring people up to speed on what's happening to this man. And I personally, I think being stuck in prison and not having any charges in the UK, I mean, that's torture.
Right. The as you mentioned in your little summary, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, reported that Assange's detention, both in the Ecuadorian embassy and his detention in London's Belmarsh Supermax prison, both amounted to psychological torture.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. I'm not sure of. So this will be speculation, but I'm pretty sure he's out of communicado. He's incommunicado with just about everybody except for his jailers and perhaps a few of his lawyers.
Right. It's even difficult with his lawyers during the extradition trial. As you noted, the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute condemned his mistreatments during the trial, and one of the reasons was he was not able to sufficiently access his lawyers while he was in prison and read documents in order to prepare for the court hearing because the security is so tight. Also, in combination with COVID, that made restrictions even worse. But largely, the picture was that they were intentionally trying to make things as difficult as possible for him by cutting his meeting times short with his lawyers and sometimes canceling them. And so there's very serious due process concerns with the trial in addition to the merits of the trial itself.
Yeah, I can understand, like the problems that are going on there and the problems that he's facing. Now, I can understand them, but I certainly don't agree with how he's being treated. It's an abomination. After all, our basic laws are based on English common law. And if the English can't even keep their own laws, then, we're supposed to be a nation of laws. And yet it only seems like, well, if the law fits us, okay, then it's great,
Right.
And I think that's disgusting.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of hypocrisy going on in the case. This year on International Press Freedom Day, Joe Biden put out a statement and talked about how great press freedom is, and he likes to hold international summits on democracy with other countries and claiming that the U.S. is leading by example. And he even likes to criticize Donald Trump for Donald Trump's attacks on the press. And yet we have this case with Julian Assange, which is probably the most consequential case for press freedoms. And the Biden administration is completely in lockstep with the Trump administration and their previous DOJ and continuing the prosecution of Assange.
Yeah, I think that's just plain horrific. And like Biden should, by all means, make a stance on this, and it should be a legitimate one. Just basically, hey, this is over.
Right. Yeah. Joe Biden has the power to end it with a presidential pardon. Merrick Garland has the power to end it if he decides the DOJ isn't going to continue anymore. Technically, it's possible that the UK might not extradite him, but that seems very unlikely at this point, and they seem to be just following orders from the United States.
Yeah, that's one other thing that popped up, and this I just got this last night from Susan McLucas, and now Julian Assange is an Australian citizen.
Mm-hmm.
You might have dual citizenship. I don't know. I'm not sure on that one. So
he briefly had citizenship with Ecuador because Ecuador had granted him political asylum for his persecution in the Ecuadorian embassy. So he briefly had citizenship. But then in 2017, Rafael Correa, the president, his term ended, and his vice president and successor, Lenin Moreno, was elected, and people thought that he would be similarly progressive and sympathetic towards Assange, but he did a total U-turn. And after being pressured by the Trump administration and coerced, he eventually revoked Assange's citizenship and turned him over to the British police.
Jeez. But by no account that I know of, he's not a U.S. citizen.
Correct.
Okay. So that makes him an Australian citizen and a former Ecuadorian citizen. And this just came in last night. The results of the Australian federal elections came in last night, which is hopeful good news for Assange case. Labour Party Anthony Albanese won Prime Minister. He has shown past signs of supporting Assange. Green Party won big too. Australian Greens support Assange. Now, my thing is if he's an Australian citizen, why would the UK extradite him to here?
Well, the U.S. is trying to prosecute him under the Espionage Act of 1917 for, I guess, perceived damages against our country. And I guess we can get into some of the details of the Espionage Act in a minute. But Australia, for the duration of this prosecution, has largely just kind of been neutral. They haven't spoken up on behalf of their own national and their own citizen. And Australia has a pretty close alliance with both the U.S. and the U.K. They have a military alliance called AUKUS, which is designed at, I guess, ramping up tensions against China, unfortunately. But they have good relations with the U.S. and the U.K. So if Australia really made a big fuss about their citizen for this prosecution, then there's a chance that could catch the attention of Garland and catch the attention of Biden. So I'm not totally up to speed on the election from last night. Susan might have a little bit more on that, hopefully. But
this is all I got. So
yeah, I hope they really start advocating for Assange.
I believe they will. I mean, if especially since he's an Australian citizen, what's he being tried in the United States for? Also, it took them years before they unsealed the charges.
Right. It was a secret sealed indictment that was initially written, I believe, in 2011 against Assange, but they didn't unseal the charges until 2019. And then originally that one charge was just for collusion for computer hacking into a government computer, although if you actually look at what they have evidence for, Assange did not actually conspire to help hack in. What Assange did was he attempted unsuccessfully to help Chelsea Manning cover her tracks. So rather than actually gaining access to the documents, which Manning herself already had access to all the documents, Assange just attempted to help her remain anonymous and conceal her identity, which is standard practice for all investigative journalists. So
yes, definitely. Yeah. I can never see somebody say, hey, guess who told me this? It's always, anonymous, especially if the weight of the government can come crashing down on you.
Right.
And sometimes they can twist such things like the Espionage Act of 1917 into almost anything they want because that personally, it should not be on the books. It should have been rescinded a long time ago, because
Right.
Eugene Debs and Emma Goldman, they were charged under the Espionage Act because they were labor leaders, and they were labor leaders during World War One, and they didn't particularly like that idea.
Right. Yeah, the Espionage Act of 1917 was originally used to try to criminalize dissent against World War I in the U.S. It's been used to prosecute anti-war U.S. congressmen. I believe the first socialist U.S. congressman was actually prosecuted under the Espionage Act just for stating that he opposed World War I. Political activists at the time were prosecuted under the act for things such as just handing out flyers and advocating against the draft. Some of those convictions actually ended up being overturned by the Supreme Court, but some of them remained. And so, in my view, the Espionage Act is unconstitutional. And in 1973, the Columbia Law Review published an article that found that the law was vague and it was probably unconstitutional. So I don't think the act should even exist. But even beyond that, the Espionage Act has never been used to prosecute a journalist for publishing information. It's been used to prosecute whistleblowers, but it's never been used against a publisher in history.
So it would be quote unquote political enemies.
Absolutely.
You know, so I do have the newspaper editor, German-American socialist, congressman, and newspaper editor, Victor L. Berger, was a labor leader, and he was a 5-time Socialist Party of America candidate. We're talking about way back at the turn of the century. And once again, Eugene Debs, Emma Goldman, who were both unbelievably powerful union people. One more here. The only ones that I can see here are Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. That's a little tough there. Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg.
Yeah.
Cablegate whistleblower Chelsea Manning.
Yeah, the case of Ellsberg is really interesting because Ellsberg's case actually ended up getting thrown out. He was neither acquitted nor convicted because it turned out that the U.S. had broken into his psychiatrist's office and obtained notes from his psychiatrist to try and dig up dirt against him. And so it was thrown out because that was an obvious violation of his rights and due process. So then when you have Assange's case, it turns out that UC Global, the Spanish surveillance company, which was contracting with the Ecuadorian embassy to surveil the embassy, it turns out that they were sending their surveillance of Assange over to the CIA so the U.S. prosecution could have recordings of Assange meeting with his lawyers in private in advance of the trial. So just that alone, in my opinion, would be enough to throw out the trial as a mistrial.
Yeah, I don't even think that would go into trial. I think at that point it would just be get this out of here.
Right.
Because attorney-client privilege, $500,000 other things. Why are you recording this individual while he's explaining himself to his lawyers? That to me is about as un-American as you can get. I mean, as far as the legal system goes,
Right.
That's sort of like doctor-patient privilege. Like there's no physician or health practitioner in the world that's going to give you a name of a patient. Now, they might describe signs and symptoms and this, that, and the other thing that the person has, but you'll never get a name.
Right.
You'll never get an identity.
Yeah, and they also spied on Assange as he was meeting with his doctors and just basically 24/7 in the Ecuadorian embassy. But I guess on Assange's health, they originally had ruled in the trial that Assange that Assange would not be extradited because of his health issues, but they ruled in favor of all of the substantive issues regarding the Espionage Act. And then, of course, that was eventually appealed by the U.S. and overturned because the U.S. provided guarantees that Assange would be taken care of and they would treat his health. But if you take a look at reporting from Yahoo News, they've shown that the United States and the CIA actually had plots that they were planning to assassinate Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, and they were planning on potentially poisoning him or getting in a shootout in streets of London with all sorts of different secret agents. They had plans to potentially just kidnap him and everything. So when you have the CIA that's was revealed to be plotting to potentially assassinate Assange, you can't take the U.S.'s assurances seriously that they're going to look after his health.
Oh, no, of course not. You know, the ghost of Alan Dulles casts a long shadow. I mean, you forget it. I read several books on him, and hopefully he's slowly roasting in hell, you know. That guy is... Anyway, yes, I could see the CIA dealing with situations like that. The interesting part is the CIA, by law, is not supposed to do anything on U.S. soil. All right? Yeah, that's by law, but, you know, forget that. How are you supposed to know that a CIA? I do know that the FBI appears to me to have concocted these absurd stories that make him look almost like Satan himself, and yet he's got severe depression, anxiety. It did mention he has Asperger's, right, which would affect him mentally in any kind of trial.
Right. The U.S., they had stories going around in the press saying that Assange was torturing his cat and that Assange was skateboarding in the embassy and playing soccer and that he was annoying people and that he was unhygienic and all of these weird things, which is just an attempt to distract from the actual details of the trial and to try and demonize and dehumanize Assange.
Yeah, deflect, you know, like just, right. Let's just make this look as horrible as we can, you know. Hey, what, they didn't give him soap? I mean, really, come on, you know, I don't believe any of that, to be honest with you. I believe it was all just, you know, like a wash-up deal to make him look horrible, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess more on the FBI, you, in your summary, briefly mentioned that the Icelandic man who was named Thordarson, it turns out that his testimonies to the FBI were false, and for a little background on him, he was arrested previously for stolen information from Icelandic corporations and also for cases of fraud, embezzlement, and also sex crimes. And essentially, he testified against Assange in order to gain immunity from the FBI so he couldn't be prosecuted. And so he lied to the FBI and gave them false testimony in order to help their case. And then later he gave an interview to an Icelandic newspaper and admitted that he had lied and made up evidence. And this evidence was, you know, he was used as a key witness in constructing the indictment for Assange and constructing the extradition. And they used allegations from this Icelandic person that Assange had helped him hack before and had, you know, encouraged him and incited him to hack in the past. And they used that as, you know, evidence to buttress their claims that he had helped Chelsea Manning hack into government computers. But it turns out that, as he admitted, he had just fabricated all of that. So when you have that false testimony, that would just be another reason which the trial should be completely thrown out.
Yeah, exactly. That's pathetic. And of course, if I'm facing all of those charges and I got a way out, I might take it. But this guy had at least enough intestinal fortitude to come forward in, what was it, Iceland, you said?
Yeah, Iceland.
Iceland, and come out and tell the truth. And that should be brought forward virtually instantaneously. And one other thing that we've mentioned a couple of times, where and what is happening with Chelsea Manning these days? Do you know?
Well, Chelsea Manning was convicted under the Espionage Act as a whistleblower, and so she ended up serving about 7 years in prison. Terrible conditions, also probably amounted to torture, and then the Obama administration pardoned her and commuted her sentence at basically the very end of his term after 7 years. But then Chelsea Manning was called to testify against Julian Assange in his trial, and Chelsea Manning courageously refused to testify. So they threw her in jail again for not testifying. And it got to the point where the conditions were so bad, she attempted suicide. And she didn't succeed. But then, like, the very next day, they released her after that because I guess it had just gotten to the point where it was too ridiculous. So Chelsea Manning, I guess, is she's free. She's doing well. But yeah, she did serve 7 years in prison, and then also went back one more time before she got released again.
Yeah, when the whole thing first broke out, I was wondering to myself, being an old veteran myself, I was wondering how the hell a PFC had that kind of information. There's some pretty heavy stuff in there.
Right, yeah.
But, so somewhere else in the chain of command had to be involved with that, but I can't go there because I don't have any proof. And that's just pure speculation. Yeah. I guess. But I'm glad that she's doing okay. I hope nobody is hunting her down.
Yeah. And then with regards to the information that Chelsea Manning linked, one accusation that a lot of people in the media and the U.S. government likes to throw around is that Assange and Manning endangered people with the information that they published. And of course, the information that they published was evidence that the U.S. was committing war crimes and obviously harming people. But they claim that because they released this information that they endangered the lives of other people. But actually, Joe Biden, when he was discussing this in a UN meeting, actually did admit that the publication had caused, quote, no substantive damage other than being embarrassing for the U.S. government. And actually, in Chelsea Manning's trial in 2013, General Robert Carr, the senior counterintelligence officer who headed the Information Review Task Force that investigated the impact of WikiLeaks disclosures, on behalf of the Department of Defense, testified, and he said that they hadn't uncovered any specific examples of anyone who had lost their life as a result of the publication. So that's kind of just a false accusation that still sometimes gets thrown around.
Yeah, and the problem is war crimes were committed.
Right.
I mean, we're sitting here accusing the Russians of committing war crimes, and still flipping off a few drones into the local city has a tendency to make things a little on the interesting side for if you want to talk about war crimes.
Right.
Let me see who's on the phone here. WZBC, this is Bob. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Could you hold on for just a sec? Try now. You should come over to radio. Are you still there? And how come I can't hear you over the radio? What did I do wrong? Essentially, everything should be working, but apparently it's not. Okay, thank you very much. Bye. And that was someone who was talking about the Australian government shifting over. And, she had some more information, but unfortunately, the phone didn't work. Now I know why the phone didn't work.
Maybe she can call back.
Oh, we've only got a few minutes left. I do have to put up Sunday Morning Country at 10 o'clock. Anyway, so your commencement is going to be, the head speaker is going to be
Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, yeah.
WZBC. Hold on. Okay, say something. Let me see if I can hear you.
I'd like to mention that I'm very curious how Merrick Garland will respond when we hold a big sign up at his commencement speech.
I'll let Mike answer that.
I'm not entirely sure. I know that recently I saw at a university that Antony Blinken was at the commencement, and there were some Palestinian students who refused to shake his hand because of the inaction that's being taken after the murder of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. And they were holding some signs as well, I saw. So that definitely made Blinken notice. So I hope that if Garland sees our signs, that he'll maybe think a little bit more about the case, or he might be forced to respond or comment in some way, because I haven't really heard many comments at all from Garland at all about the case. He's just pretty much been silent.
Susan, you still there? Oh, she hung up. I've noticed that over time, a lot of times political situations can be, we had one individual that I was not particularly fond of, and neither was anybody else in the town. And he was one of the aldermen in a Nebraska town. And they had a town meeting. And when he started to speak, we all stood up and turned around. And that got his attention really quick. And by the way, he was not reelected. He was, I think he had about 3 months left, but he was thrown out. He was one of these crazy radical guys. Hey, let's change take all these things out of the library. Hang on just a sec. Hello, WZBC. Oh, okay. Well, we got your back. We've got a few minutes left before I have to bring on cousin Kate. So have you got anything else on that Australian thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the elections in Australia, but yeah, I hope that the new government actually speaks up for Julian Assange, because I know that there's definitely supporters for Assange in his home country, just as there are across the world. But so far, there's been a real lack of leadership from Australia. So I hope that the new government changes things, and I hope they do it quickly.
Yeah, so do I. Susan, have you got anything to add? I must have lost you again. Sorry. I had her online, but it didn't quite go. All right. So, there is... Oh, boy. What did I do with it? Throw it on the floor. Oh. Duh. All right. So, I'd like to thank you, Mike, for coming in and bringing a little intelligence to this show. Damn sure no, I don't have any. And thank you for keeping us abreast of what's going on and for the work you're doing. And with luck, we'll get more people, push and pressure, and make sure that this gets taken care of just as quickly as humanly possible.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if anyone in the Boston area is interested, on May 29th, by 8 a.m., preferably a little bit early, people can come to Harvard and come to the commencement, and hopefully will be noticed.
Every time I've been at Harvard, I don't know where I am, Big place. Okay. With all of this said, once again, thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure meeting you and having you on the air. And that will end it for us. You have been listening to Truth and Justice Radio, WZBC, Newton. 4 hours of spirited examination of war-making, empire, corrupt justice, as we just saw, engineered poverty, lying politicians, jingoism, corporate criminality, media disinformation, and engineered chaos. Any views expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Boston College or its Board of Trustees. Our archives can be found at all one word, truthandjusticeradio.org. Please, as the